The Jeffrey Epstein Island Files, the story the world was never meant to see. In December of this year, the United States government released thousands of documents about a man who died 6 years ago. But something was wrong. Pages upon pages appeared completely black. Names were erased. Entire sections vanished. And buried within those digital shadows was an island where the powerful believed their secrets would never surface. Little St. James. 72 acres of Caribbean paradise, purchased in 1998 for $7.95 million. To the tourists sailing past its pristine beaches, it was just another private retreat for the wealthy. To the girls who arrived there, it was something else entirely. A place with no escape. A place where the rules of the outside world simply ceased to exist. Jeffrey Epstein transformed this island into what would later be documented in court filings as the physical center of an international sex trafficking operation. He built a network of buildings, installed surveillance cameras that captured thousands of hours of footage, and maintained meticulous records of who came, who went, and what transpired behind closed doors. The island staff saw everything. Housekeepers, maintenance workers, pilots, boat captains. They witnessed the arrival of underage girls. They observed the parade of wealthy and powerful visitors. And according to testimony that emerged years later during the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, they were given explicit instructions. A household manual distributed to employees contained one unambiguous directive: see nothing, say nothing, hear nothing. One housekeeper who worked at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion testified about what he witnessed when Maxwell moved in. He described frequent massages, young girls who appeared barely past childhood, and an atmosphere where asking questions was forbidden. His testimony revealed the machinery of silence that protected what was happening. The staff wasn't just employed. They were conscripted into complicity through fear, compensation, and carefully constructed non-disclosure agreements. But the island itself kept records that employees never could. Flight logs documented hundreds of trips from 1998 through 2019. Visitor logs that the government obtained but has only partially released. Surveillance footage from cameras mounted throughout the property. Island blueprints showing hidden spaces and private rooms. Phone records capturing tens of thousands of calls. And somewhere in those millions of pages of evidence that investigators collected, there existed a complete map of everything that occurred on Little St. James. The question that haunts every document release is simple: where did all of it go? To understand how secrets survive, you need to understand how they're protected. And Jeffrey Epstein's secrets had layers of protection that stretched from Caribbean sand to the highest offices of American justice. In 2006, the Palm Beach Police Department concluded a 9-month investigation. They had identified dozens of victims. They had witness testimony. They had evidence of systematic abuse involving girls as young as 14. The local prosecutor prepared felony charges that could have resulted in decades of imprisonment. But those charges never came. Instead, federal prosecutors in Florida negotiated what legal experts would later call one of the most extraordinary plea deals in American criminal history. A non-prosecution agreement signed in 2008. Epstein pled guilty to just 2 state charges: solicitation of prostitution. He served 13 months in a county jail, during which he was allowed to leave for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to go to his office. It was called work release. The agreement contained something else. A provision that immunized not just Epstein, but any potential co-conspirators. The victims were never consulted. They were never even informed. The agreement was sealed, hidden from public view until investigative journalists pried it loose years later. And the 53-page federal indictment that prosecutors had already drafted, detailing the full scope of the sex trafficking operation, was filed away in a drawer and forgotten. Years later, a Department of Justice investigation would reveal that the lead prosecutor who negotiated that deal had grossly violated the rights of victims by keeping them in the dark. But by then, Epstein had already served his minimal sentence. He had already returned to his mansions, his private island, his private jet. The window for prosecution had effectively closed. The plea deal wasn't just about one case. It was a template. It demonstrated that with sufficient wealth, with the right connections, with lawyers who knew exactly which pressure points to press, even overwhelming evidence could be negotiated down to nearly nothing. But more importantly, it created a precedent of silence. Because if victims couldn't get justice when the evidence was fresh, when witnesses were available, when the crimes were recent, what hope did they have years later when memories had faded and documents had disappeared? The 2008 agreement buried more than charges. It buried testimony. It buried the identities of co-conspirators who remained unnamed and uninvestigated. And tourist modeling opportunities and massages that became assaults. They described being flown on private jets to multiple properties, including the island, where the abuse continued and escalated. Their testimony was specific. It was consistent. And it was corroborated by flight logs, by employee witnesses, and by photographs that prosecutors presented to the jury. Maxwell was convicted. She is currently serving 20 years in federal prison. But those 4 women represented only a fraction of the victims. Court documents reference dozens more. Women who came forward during the original investigation in 2006. Women who filed lawsuits after Epstein's death. Women whose names appear in documents that remain sealed. In September 2025, one of those women spoke publicly for the first time. Marina Lacerda, who provided critical evidence that allowed prosecutors to finally charge Epstein with sex trafficking in 2019, stood on the Capitol steps and urged the Department of Justice to release all files related to the case. She wasn't alone. Multiple survivors appeared that day, their faces visible, their voices no longer hidden. They talked about the investigations that stalled, the documents that remained classified, the names that were redacted even when there was no legal justification for secrecy. What became clear in their testimony was that the public accounting of Epstein's crimes represented only what prosecutors chose to present. Grand jury transcripts from the original Florida investigation remain partially sealed. The full list of people who visited Little St. James has never been released. Thousands of photographs seized from Epstein's properties have never been made public. And critically, the identities of many co-conspirators mentioned in victim testimony have never been revealed. In December 2025, when the Justice Department released its latest batch of documents, survivors immediately noticed something disturbing. Entire pages were completely redacted. Names that victims had publicly stated years earlier were blacked out. Even some victims' own identities were inconsistently protected, with one survivor shocked to discover her real name appearing unredacted multiple times in documents released to the public, even though she had been assured of anonymity. The pattern that emerged wasn't about protecting victims. It was about protecting someone else. The evidence that vanished. On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in a cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. He had been arrested 5 weeks earlier on federal sex trafficking charges. He was awaiting trial. And according to the official investigation, he died by suicide. But the circumstances surrounding his death raised questions that have never been adequately answered. 2 cameras positioned directly outside his cell malfunctioned. Surveillance footage that should have captured the hallway leading to his cell was accidentally erased due to what officials described as technical errors. The jail had recorded footage from the wrong cell block. 2 guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes were found to have falsified records, sleeping on duty instead. And a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's family disputed the official suicide finding, pointing to fractures in his neck that were more consistent with homicide. The Justice Department's Inspector General conducted an investigation. Their report documented systemic failures at the facility, inadequate staffing, and a culture of negligence. But it couldn't answer the fundamental question: what exactly happened during the hours when the cameras weren't working and the guards weren't watching? More troubling was what happened to evidence beyond the jail. The surveillance system at Little St. James had recorded thousands of hours of footage. Prosecutors mentioned these recordings in their evidence list. But when lawyers for victims requested access to those tapes, they were told that much of the footage was missing or had been destroyed. The FBI stated that only a portion of the island surveillance footage was preserved. Similarly, phone records that would have shown every call made to and from Epstein's various properties existed. The government obtained them, but only fragments have ever been released. The evidence list published by the Department of Justice mentions one red road containing island blueprints, island photos, and documents. What's in those blueprints? Who appears in those photos? The public still doesn't know. Epstein kept physical address books filled with names and phone numbers of everyone in his network. Multiple versions of these books surfaced over the years, obtained by journalists and investigators. They contained the contact information of princes, presidents, scientists, and celebrities. But appearing in an address book isn't a crime. It doesn't prove participation in any illegal activity. What could prove participation was the evidence that explained why those names were there, who actually visited the island, and what they did when they arrived. That evidence exists. Or rather, it existed. Flight logs released in court show hundreds of trips, but many passenger names are listed only as initials or simply omitted. The full manifests that pilots were required to maintain have never been entirely released. In 2024, investigators using cellular data analysis published findings showing they could track nearly 200 mobile phones that had been present on Little St. James during the government had attempted to hide information, but failed even at that. And what they failed to hide only raised more questions about what they successfully concealed. When Attorney General Pamela Bondi released this latest batch of files, she framed it as transparency. But transparency isn't measured by how many pages you release. It's measured by what those pages actually reveal. And what they reveal most clearly is how much more has been deliberately kept hidden. The names we'll never know. There's a myth that circulates every time new Epstein documents are released. The myth of the list. People imagine a single document with every name, every crime, every connection laid out in clear, prosecutable detail. They imagine that somewhere in a vault, there exists a complete record of everyone who participated in or benefited from Epstein's operation. That list doesn't exist. Not in that form. But what does exist is something more complex and perhaps more damning. A network. Documented in fragments across thousands of pages. Flight logs that show patterns but not purposes. Phone records that show connections but not conversations. Financial documents that show transactions but not their true nature. Employee testimony that describes what they saw but can't explain what they didn't see. The unsealing of court documents in January 2024 and again in December 2025 put certain names in headlines. Former presidents, British royalty, prominent attorneys, tech executives. But being named in a document doesn't mean committing a crime. It means being part of Epstein's world. And the distance between being part of that world and being complicit in its darkest operations is precisely what these sealed files would clarify. That's why they remain sealed. Because the real secret isn't who knew Jeffrey Epstein. It's who knew what he was doing and did nothing. Who participated. Who enabled. Who looked the other way because it was easier or more profitable or less dangerous than telling the truth. The survivors who have spoken publicly have named names. They've described specific incidents with specific people in specific locations. Some of those people have denied the allegations. Others have settled lawsuits quietly, without admitting guilt. And still others have never been officially questioned, because the investigations that might have led to them were closed, restricted, or redirected. Even now, with multiple congressional investigations, with new laws mandating document releases, with public pressure at historic levels, the pace of disclosure remains glacially slow. The Epstein Files Transparency Act passed in 2025 requires the Justice Department to release all records. But the law includes exceptions for ongoing investigations, for privacy protections, for national security concerns. And each exception becomes a tool for delay. Closing. Little St. James sits empty now. After Epstein's death, his estate sold the island. The new owners have reportedly demolished some of the buildings, trying to erase the physical infrastructure of what occurred there. But you cannot demolish documents. You cannot demolish testimony. You cannot demolish the truth that victims carry with them. What makes the Epstein case so disturbing isn't just the crimes themselves. It's the system that allowed those crimes to continue for decades. The 2008 plea deal that prioritized secrecy over justice. The investigators who had evidence but didn't act. The institutions that turned away when victims came forward. The lawyers who negotiated silence. The journalists who were threatened or sued into backing down. And even now, years after Epstein's death, that same system continues to function. Documents released but rendered unreadable through redaction. Evidence that exists but remains classified. Witnesses who want to speak but are bound by legal agreements. Victims who deserve answers but receive only partial truths. The recent document releases have revealed something important, not answers, but the architecture of how answers are hidden. We can see the shape of what's being concealed by examining what they chose to redact. We can infer the power of protected names by observing which names are consistently erased. We can measure the scale of what happened by counting the pages that remain sealed. In the weeks since the latest release, survivors have spoken with a unified message. This is not enough. The full truth must come out. Not for revenge. Not for spectacle. But because justice requires it. Because accountability demands it. Because the only way to prevent this from happening again is to understand exactly how it happened the first time. Every sealed document represents a choice. A choice by someone in power to prioritize secrecy over transparency. A choice to protect reputations over victims. A choice to preserve the comfort of the powerful over the rights of the abused. And every time that choice is made, the question becomes sharper. What are they still protecting? Who are they still protecting? And how many other islands exist where secrets are kept, where evidence is buried, where the powerful believe they can operate beyond consequence? Jeffrey Epstein is dead. But the system that enabled him, the network that surrounded him, the evidence that would expose them all, that remains very much alive. As of December 2025, over 700,000 pages of Epstein-related documents